Have you ever submitted yourself to peer pressure? Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host Rich Gear as well. And Doug, we have a very special guest here tonight. I'm really excited to see Dr. Jerry Bergman on here, and we're going to talk about a very interesting subject which you've brought up here, and about the peer pressure in the scientific community and as well as other places, and why creation is very difficult to accept because of that peer pressure. Do I got the gist of what we're talking about tonight?
Yeah, and I was
Sounds
going to
good.
also talk about peer pressure, and that comes from peer review.
Ah,
Maybe Jerry Bergman has a few thoughts about that
I think you would have
particular
a
subject.
lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's indirect peer pressure, but it's a huge problem in academia. Now, it's not a problem if you are espousing an idea that's generally agreed with, like evolution. If you're looking at the other side, the creation worldview, it could often cause problems. And I've written 4 books on this, as you guys know, which detail the problems that people have questioning evolution. It is an ideology that is not to be questioned. And I don't think they realize this. They feel it's true, and they feel that evolution is how we got here. And therefore, there is concern that you may affect that belief. And it's a belief in many ways. And therefore, there's a lot of peer pressure. And a lot of this, it's not really open, it's unknown. It's known if you're a creationist, then you realize it's there and you just deal with it. But by and large, most people are in the evolution community, don't really see it. It's not really very visible. It's not like they're going to say, well, now you're an evolutionist now, aren't you? I would hope most creationists know this and they stay in the closet. And you survive quite well as long as you're in the closet. But once you get out of the closet, there is often problems. And there
So,
can be problems.
Jerry, Jerry, why don't you list out the books you have written about it? I'd like the audience to hear that. Oh, the 4 books you've written that deals with the subject. What are the titles of the books and where they can get
Okay,
them?
I'll actually have to, titles are interesting. People ask me what the titles of my books are, and I have to say,
I know you've
gee,
written
I
so
don't
many of them.
know.
I can keep track of
The
them.
reason is because I come up with a title and the publishers not uncommonly come up with another title. And therefore I don't always keep track of the titles, but I'll just get them. I'll read them to you. Just a minute.
Doug, okay.
Anyway, peer pressure is a problem. I remember experiencing a little bit of that when I was taking a class on radioisotope dating. And it was a little bit more than peer pressure. I was told I wasn't going to get a grade unless I wrote my paper from an evolutionary point of view.
Wow, was this when you were at Michigan State, Doug?
Yes, it was.
Wow,
And so I remembered that, and I said to myself, well, perhaps I can practice writing fiction. And
Wow.
so the fiction was the evolutionary point of view, but it turns out the previous paper that I'd written that pointed out the assumptions of radioisotope dating and the flaws in it, and why we can't trust it. It turns out, it actually reprised later on in the rate project, where a lot of the things that I had
Yeah.
speculated on in my paper really it turned out to experimentally to show that it is very possible that the reasons why you get dates in the millions of years are not from radioisotope decay, but from other factors.
Well,
And
Doug,
so,
we know that there's the overarching idea that that man is basically and evolved the highest evolutionary link in a long series of the great chain of being, which was pasta back there. But I think it was interesting this one article you sent me, Doug, and talk about the cultural philosophy of it, that and it got a guy named Karl Barth. You heard of him?
yeah.
I like to call him Carl Barth because I like to upcup when I read some of his stuff. And but the idea, his idea that was, if even if Jesus was not historically true, we would still have to we still had the gospel would still be true, or words to that effect. Let me see if I can find where this is at. It's
That doesn't make
unbelievable.
any sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all, but that's exactly what Paul Tillich and people like that were postulating back in the day. They really were, and it was just really sad.
They're trying to hold on to the cultural trappings of
That's what
Christianity.
it's
Uh,
something I think you and I have talked about, and I know it's something that I've really stressed in things, how the cultural things have been eroded over the centuries. It was interesting because it was a time before Christ came that the world was pretty much enthralled to demons. You had the one isolated thing,
mhm.
Israel, right? The little that God had kind of picked out through which our Redeemer was going to be coming, the Messiah. But other than that, the world was really steeped in demonology and human sacrifice and every kind of perversion and things you could think of. Violence was pretty epidemic. Even I mean, it was so bad before the flood. It was the whole world was destroyed. But then Christ comes, and little by little, the Christian message went out, and really a lot of that got not, I don't say swept away, but pushed back in quite a bit. The influence of, let's say, you go to India, and things of that nature, where they used to burn their wives after the husbands died, and or human sacrifice. It became who hears a human sacrifice today? This is Christian morality that is steeped through the entire world. But
Well, we
after the
have abortion.
yeah, well, what I'm saying, what's happened is though, after the 1700s, after it's almost like we started to invite the demons back in,
Mm.
okay? And it's really been a cultural, but as you said, and you pointed out very well, we want to hold on to the cultural trappings, the things we made our life better. That even the church and the institutions of government and marriage and all those kinds of things for a long time until you come to World War II after World War One and all these things, and they go, well, I guess if there's no God, there can be no rules.
Mhm.
So you have the postmodern thing, and we've talked about this again. But after the postmodern thing, people realize you can't live without rules. So man makes rules in his own image. And this is the devilish plot. It's been a cosmic war for a long time. This is where we are today, and
I,
evolution is a big part of that thing. A
I
big
found my
part of that
books.
thing. Oh, you're back? Okay.
Yeah, I'm
All right.
back.
What
So,
what are they?
Slaughter Distance. This is the first one that was done,
Slaughter of
and
the Distance. I have that book.
this
Yep.
is the third edition. And basically, I started that probably 15 years ago, and then censoring the Darwin skeptics. And really, they all cover pretty much the same thing, but censoring the Darwin skeptics and then silencing the Darwin skeptics. Had to give the next book another title, so that's what I did. And then Darwinism is the doorway to atheism, covers this as well. And I have
Okay.
a couple of other books, but these will do the trick. By the way, my books, I look on adall.com is a good way of finding books. And books that I authored, there's only over 500 copies on adall.com. And it's a way you can save some money and you can buy them for less money on adall.com. But it's they're out there. My question is, how many people have read them? And that's a concern that most authors have because many of us, we write, well, when I buy a used book, I often find they're brand new and hardly used. And I wonder, did the previous owner read this book? And typically, textbooks you can buy or books that are required for a class. And I'll notice that there may be one chapter somebody read because there's a lot of underlining and no other chapter was read. Of course, that's unfortunately students. They'll read a chapter and they'll have finished the books and they'll take a test on the chapter and then they'll move on. So, anyways, they're out there. I would hope more people would become aware of them. The chief way is if I get into churches and I talk about this. But again, a lot of people, they work at a car mechanic, they haven't had this issue. Confront them. And so therefore, a lot of people have not faced it. And I think a lot of people find it hard to believe when I talk about what happens. And it's a downward idea. A lot of people feel, I don't feel good when you hear about this. Want to hear about good things. And so therefore, it's not a popular sermon, although I may mention it. And usually the people who read my books have experienced the problems. And I've documented about 200 cases, 100 in detail, of people who have questioned Darwinism and ended up losing their career or being denied a degree or doing a doctoral thesis and not having accepted, like a friend of mine did, Ohio State University. So it is a major, major problem. I find it interesting, though, that when I have done interviews with people like Gutsick Gibbon, if you know who she is, she's done interviews with just about all the well-known creationists, and she basically says, "Oh, that's not true. It's not true totally. Why? You don't have any problems. Discrimination isn't an issue." And I think she either is not aware of it or does not want to be aware of it. I'll be doing a Zoom show in a month or so, and I'll be covering that in detail. So it's a big, if we had the academic freedom to criticize evolution without having to worry about losing our jobs, the indoctrination of evolutionists would be far less or at least countered. At least they would hear the other side. And that's why it's important to hear the other side. People often claim, they say to me, for example, yeah, all you read is books in favor of creation. Actually, 90% of the books I read are written by evolutionists. Now, why do I read those? Well, to get ideas to write articles. And so I don't read that many books written by creationists. I read a lot of stuff written by evolutionists. And so I'm aware of the other side. And a lot of evolutionists don't seem to be aware of that we do read the other side. And so therefore, they
Well,
think
don't you
we
think,
read
Jared,
one side like they do.
when you're not in the dominant paradigm, which evolution is the dominant paradigm right now, as far as culturally, as far as and academically, it's the dominant philosophy. That they don't have to be quite as they don't have to read our side. They don't feel they have to. They feel they believe we're in the ascendant. Why do we have to do it? It's lazy thinking, but it's pretty human. I've noticed, when the shoe was on the other foot. I still remember when we've talked about the Scopes trial in times past. Clarence Darrow argued that it's the highest form of bigotry to teach only one view of origins. But suddenly now it's on the other side. They're only teaching one view of origins, but it's evolution, not creation.
Yeah, very,
So
very well
it's
put.
very ironic that, but see, this is what I've noticed about people who are sort of dictatorial in their philosophies. They will use the Christians or the creationist sense of tolerance and fair play, and they will use that to sort of hamstring us from coming at them very hard. And then once they get into the camel gets the nose in the tent, so to speak, and they take over, they have no tolerance whatsoever. I find the same thing is very true in the politics, but that's a whole different story. But there's the same tendency to be very intolerant once you become the ascendant philosophy, religion, or belief system. And this is what we find right now. Once the world was Christianity had gone out and had been influenced, and still the influences, the vestiges are still very apparent. I talked to Doug before when you were out looking for your book, Jerry. We still don't really see human sacrifice anymore. That was very common back before Christ came into the world. Okay, so we still have things that there are Christian virtue things here, but a lot of things that Doug mentioned, the abortion, that's virtually human sacrifice and things of that nature. These are cultural things that happen once you reject the Creator and the words that He's spoken to you. You reject those things, and ultimately you start doing what's right in your own eyes, and usually that's wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
this is where I believe. I don't feel, I see it. It's in front of us all the time.
It's
So
in the culture, Rich, and
it's
you
endemic.
see that in if you go to our museum here in Grand Rapids, they have a fairly extensive evolution fossil exhibit, and there I saw just the other day a picture of the dog that this big great blue whale had evolved from.
You're gonna get a kick out of it. Have you seen the cover, Doug?
I haven't seen the cover
Oh, you
yet,
haven't seen
so.
it.
But yeah, it's and so I you have all these fossils with dates on them,
There you
and
go. There's the cover.
that's kind of interesting to see that you have that kind of bias shown throughout our culture, where you get your millions of years inculcated into your brain because it's just sitting there throughout your all the exhibits that you see.
I think the old propagandic idea that if you say something, a lie, often enough and loud enough, it will eventually be accepted as true without any proof. And I think that's what we feel, that's what we see or experience in a lot of these things. 77 million years ago, or 35 million years ago, or 4.6 billion years ago, all these things are bandied about as though they're established fact. And those who have looked at the evidence say this that doesn't hold up very well at all. It's really not very good at all. But it's so it is so like you said, inculcated into the culture that we have really a big job to get around it. And Jerry, I think what you said, the peer pressure influence that really stops creationists from coming out of the closet, stops people from going. You've been a victim of it yourself, Jerry, right? I mean, you've had things
Yeah.
happen to you, and you can speak from firsthand experience about this stuff. But like you say, if it doesn't affect you, we live in this age of this postmodern, this postmodern. If it doesn't affect me, it's not real or relevant. And I think people don't understand that it is real and relevant, and it will affect you ultimately. And this is why we see some of the opponents purporting that a man can be a woman, that it's okay to slaughter kids even after they're born. These are things that would violate every sense of Christendom or any sense of past morality that you and I grew up with. But it's being promoted and proposed with straight faces. I mean, we're seeing it right now because the evolutionary dogma allowed the camel to get his nose in the tent. It gave an image of respectability and reasonableness back in the day, but now it's gone way overboard. Of course, very early on, though, Jerry talked about social Darwinism, which talked about even so very early on, there were things that were going on. It's a religion of death, okay, and that's really what it is.
That's a problem, big problem. And that's one focus of mine is to look at the harm that evolution has done. And not many creationists do that. They say, try to get an area nobody else covers or nobody else covers in detail. And that's why I kind of opened this up, partially because my background is partly in history, sociology, and psychology. And so therefore I have an interest in this area. And there's so much information. And I find interesting that the creation movement's controversial. There's a lot of pushback, but relative to what I'm doing, hardly any pushback because it's clearly in the literature. I don't have to exaggerate. I can just quote other people, like Hitler's Cross, excellent book by Erwin Lutzer, goes into this issue in detail. And therefore, in fact, I met him once, Edwin Lutzer. Was a head of the Moody Bible Church in Chicago. And I talking about Darwin, and he said, I'd sure hate to be on Judgment Day when Darwin's there. Darwin probably is not going to be treated too well.
No, he's going to have a real problem. Yep.
A big problem.
There's a article that I've been reading here called Peer Pressure and Truth that's on the Answers in Genesis website. And so if you look at that particular article, found it very interesting, some of the things that it talked about, that people believe in a theistic evolution type of scenario where make a compromise between what the scripture actually says and the evolutionary worldview and try to get a foot in both camps. And that it doesn't take very long to see that that's not a very satisfying solution.
I'm just working on an article on theistic evolution, and I find many more problems with it than I thought. In fact, about 70% of all evangelicals now accept theistic evolution. So it's really taken over. And the feeling is that, well, I can accept the science, evolutionary science, and I can accept the scriptures. But in fact, they're accepting neither the science nor the scriptures because both are very opposed to theistic evolution. It surprises me not only the opposition that theists present, but also the opposition that Darwinists present, that they feel it's a foolish attempt to try to mend two things that can't be mended, can't be put together. And so I find pretty cogent criticism by both evolutionists and also by Christians. So it's a huge mistake. Well, it's over half of all Christians accept theistic evolution, and my guess is most are not aware of how indeed fallacious that view of theistic evolution is. Theistic evolution is where basically you stick God in here and there. How do we go from an ape to a man? Well, God stuck in a few mutations and designed a few changes so that eventually the ape would turn into a human. And of course, that's first of all ridiculous. There's 450 million different different genes in humans compared to apes or chimps. Actually, the comparison is chimps. Or actually, the comparison is not living chimps, but the supposed ancestral chimp, which became a modern chimp. And so, therefore, it's embarrassing.
I always ask the question, I said, even if somehow you had two ape-like hominids, as they like to say, become a male and a female exactly at the same time, based on modern genetic stuff, how come we're not all extinct 300 times over? The point of it is, especially with the time limit you're talking about, there would be so much inbreeding and so much it would destroy the human genome before it ever really got going. But they might come up to you and say, "Well, you start with Adam and Eve." I says, "Yeah, but we didn't start with Adam and Eve. We started with God, and
Yeah,
God is the one, He made the genome perfect, and yet and introduced it at a fall. There's a difference, okay? But even they eventually death and destruction came in, and it degenerated. You could see this in the genetic record, in the historical record. But I said, you cannot tell me. But I mean, but theistic evolution is always troubling to me because ostensibly they're Christians, and I've always had a problem with how can you believe in Jesus Christ when the very purpose for him coming was to undo the effect of a literal fall? It makes no sense to me that if death preceded Adam and Eve, or whoever you perceive him to be, him and her to be, then you've basically negated the work of the cross. There's no point, and the evolutionists know this. That's why theistic evolution is ridiculous. I mean, it's you're trying to keep feet in both camps and you're trying to make, oh, I want to, can't we just get along? The reality is, I can get along with anybody, but not by compromising what is true and
yeah,
what the scriptures clearly teaches. But and it's very obvious because you see what happens to real creationists, and you've experienced this article. Actually, mentioned you, Jerry, by name. Says you were I think it answers Genesis, written by Ross Olson. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he mentions
oh
you in an
yeah,
article. Yeah, it says, yeah, Dr. Jerry Bergman, himself a victim of persecution, documents many instances of withholding of degrees, terminating positions, and denying tenure to creationists. So you're actually in an article here that,
yeah.
that you didn't write.
Well, it's good to get the
But good.
publicity because
You're
that way
famous.
people
Well,
are
you
learning
already
my
knew.
work.
You already were anyway. But
Yeah,
point of it is that theistic evolution makes no sense and that's why it's attacked by both sides of it. But yet the Christians, I think they're just. It's kind of like the old, putting the ostrich head in the sand or something, which is not really true. But it's the picture of they're burying their head in the sand, so to speak, to ignore the uncomfortable reality that Jesus said, if they hated me, they're not going to love you.
yeah,
And if you stand for what my word is true, then you're not going to be loved. You're not going to be loved. And we as human beings, we don't like that. We really don't. And but it's hard. So, and you've stuck your neck out quite far over the years, and your head's still intact, which is good to see. You know.
yeah. Me and many others, me and
Yeah, you and
hundreds of
many
others.
others, correct. I mean, we talked about the guy with the triceratops. I always forget his name. Doug, you know it. The
Mark
finding soft
Armitage?
hermitage, yeah, finding the soft tissue.
Mark
And the only reason
Armitage, yeah.
and but the amazing thing is what's her name? Schweitzer. What's her name? Schweitzer. Mary.
Mary,
Mary
Mary
Schweitzer.
Schweitzer.
Yeah, because she's still an evolutionist. Don't know how, but she was at least an honest one. She's
Yeah,
admitted there's hemoglobin, or there's the red blood cell. I mean, and so, but she's still holding on to evolution. I don't understand that at all either. But
You're
but
talking
people
about
people think
dinosaur soft tissue, Rich. Not
that,
everybody can discern that.
how can this last even 100,000 years, let alone 65 million or 120? I mean, how can you possibly? But they just blithely say, well, I guess it can be. And then of course the answer is, of course, the thing is, why do you care about the millions of years? I said, because scripture does not allow for much more than 7,000 years, 6,000 years for time. It just doesn't allow it, you
Yeah.
know?
Well,
Yet they
well,
say,
6,006 to maybe 10,000, depending on which text you
Yeah,
go from.
but no matter what you do, you're not going to get yourself 1 million, let alone 100 million or 4.6 billion. You're not going to get that ever, you know, or 3.5 for the Cambrian explosion, you know.
But if you talk to some of the professors at Calvin or even the Hope College or who are in the theology department, not necessarily the science department, they will.
Theology department's even worse, Doug.
Oh, that's right. You have science professors who are actually are out of the closet creationists, but
Yep.
in the theology department, they're so used to harmonizing science and the Bible with their compromise theories that they don't want to depart from it because they've taught it all their life. And
Well, there's a strong pastoral tendency, as I said, to want to get along. And quite frankly, that's why the creationists are literally a voice in the wilderness. They're really a more of a prophetic voice. And that rubs people the wrong way. And so I guess we can't be surprised, shocked, maybe, or even disappointed, although we don't like it any better than anybody else to be hassled. But the courageous people that come out to speak these words of truth, and you, Jerry, are one of them, really speak volumes that there is courage in the Christian church, despite the fact that many of the evangelicals and let alone the old line denomination, the Catholics are, they've gone south for a long time. And you document, Jerry, your book, the Methodist Darwin syndrome. The churches have gone, they've caved to a lot of churches have gone into it, the organized ones. The fact is, there are still those lone voices in the wilderness that are crying out, speaking the truth in love, but with force and with reason and with true, actually the sword of the spirit backing them up. And I think that's it's an amazing thing to see. I love to see it, you know.
so, Jerry, I'm going to ask you a question. Does the compromise with evolution affect the preaching of the gospel? Does it cause a uh, dissonance
Good question.
with the actual truth of the gospel?
yeah, what I see it is theistic evolution opens the door to evolution. And if I'm theistic evolutionist, well, I've got God there, but I've got evolution too. And so a lot of evolutionists feel that, well, it's not that bad because they're on the way to rejecting totally the theological worldview and accepting the evolutionary worldview. And therefore, at least they got their foot in our camp. They might be totally in our camp, they would say, but at least they've got their foot in our camp. So that indeed, as time goes on, they'll realize that indeed there's no reason for God in the history of the world. The ironic thing is that Darwin was very clear in what he was trying to do. He was trying to murder God. How do you do that? You destroy the reason that people believe in God. Why do people believe in God? Because of the creation. They look at the creation and they realize that there must be a creator because of the creation. And therefore, if you come up with another creator, specifically evolution, then you've negated the need to believe in the creator. And so Darwin knew that, and that's why he pushed this idea. No one knows why he hated God so much, but the theory is that Anna, his youngest daughter, who was 12 when she died, he really upset him and never got over that. And therefore he railed against God because indeed God took, he thought it originally, God took Anna away. Or if there is no God, then Anna just died and that's the way it is. So therefore, that's the common theory, but it's well recognized that Darwin had a strong hatred towards Christianity, toward God, and towards religion.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why. But again, it's well known in the scholarly literature, but how many people have an in-depth knowledge of what Darwin believed and where he was at? There's a lot of books written about him, and he wrote a lot about himself, so I guess we have no excuse, but I have an interest in Darwin, so I've read a lot about him.
Yeah,
And
you have.
so a lot of other,
Yeah, you have a book called The Dark Side of Darwin, and um, it shows the uh, problems that he had. He really was having some physical problems as well at the end. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. Thanks for joining us tonight.